What did you see and what did you hear about the attack on the Americans at the airport as they were leaving? Was that being talked about?
Right. So I actually went and met with that family several times. I think...
Sorry, which family?
The family that had been bombed.
Okay.
Oh, so this was after the family.
In the retaliation.
Yeah. So in the retaliation. So, yeah, so at that point, so I was in Mazar when that happened, and I wasn't in Kabul, thank goodness. And yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily talked about that much because I think everyone was just in this desperate situation to get out. Mm-hmm. I don't think it deterred people from wanting to leave. People were still just trying to find whatever avenue they could up until that last plane left. So, everybody was in survival mode. So I don't know that it, and you have to remember Afghans, this was a horrific bombing and something like 150 Afghans killed. I was going to
say more Afghans by orders of magnitude died than Americans. Yeah.
And so it wasn't that unusual for them, to be honest, because this is something that they'd lived through for a really long time. And that had become a part of their life, I think. And so there was just so much fear about what was going to happen in having to be stuck or to stay in Afghanistan after that. And so then, of course, there was the retaliation where the US bombed a family, a car, a Toyota Corolla, believing that it was an ISIS operative. And it turned out that that was not the case and that a lot of children were killed. And it was just from this one family, and that was just absolutely tragic. So we visited them several times, and yeah, that was just heartbreaking because they never received an apology. And I think that there was acknowledgement that that was an error, but and I think the magnitude also of realizing that those sorts of errors, I mean, they happened a lot in Afghanistan, but we don't hear about them because, unlike this particular case, because it happened at a time when all the news was on Afghanistan, it got some attention, but often these things don't, and they're just sort of chalked up to collateral damage.
The news coverage of the whole thing, it was really interesting to watch because you're right. There was, when you say that there was a lack of interest in covering Afghanistan, I mean, that cannot be overstated. Yeah. There really was no desire to cover anything Afghanistan, even as the country was starting to fall. It was like editors still believed that this is a non-news story. Americans are sick of reading about Afghanistan and the war there, and this is just another war headline. And they just kept believing that until it got to a point where people really had to be, it was almost like the events that were happening, finally, it was like it grabbed news editors by the shoulders and shook them like, no, this is historic and consequential, and you need to pay attention. And then it was like something flipped. Yeah. And funny enough, at the same time, that's when the U.S. military started really tamping down on journalist access. And, on HKIA, they were trying to find all the journalists, round them up, put them in a room where they couldn't see and stuff like that.
And send them home, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it got really, really tough. And, our mutual friend, Jericho Denman, who was over there at that time, he was on the base, he got away with continuing to go out there and get footage because people thought that he was like, insert whatever 3-letter agency. Yeah. He's a former Army Ranger, so he knew how to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Yeah.
But he kind of went incognito as a journalist at that point while everybody else had been rounded up. But it was not a good environment for showing the truth of what was going out. And then even afterwards, there was like this lack of willingness to admit how terribly it had gone. And I don't want to take anything away from the service members that were performing a really miraculous human evacuation in very dire circumstances. There's those Air Force pilots and crew and the people that were on the ground out there trying to genuinely help people.
Yeah.
Like genuinely felt bad for the situation. Young people that hadn't even fought in the height of the war, 19, 20-year-olds who were kids, if not even born when 9/11 happened. And they did all their best, but it was an unmitigated disaster. I mean, when you have video footage of people falling off of airplane wheels because they're so desperate to get out, suicide bombings where, over a dozen Americans and over 150 Afghans are killed, no vetting of who is or isn't going out. I mean, there was a lot of issues with this. So when it comes to bombing a family, it was kind of like, I feel like almost like, oh, just another piece of evidence of how horribly this had been executed. And at that point, I think that the news, I mean, that was covered by American news pretty well, but I feel like it fell flat against the larger story of how disastrous everything was. And to your point, I think almost like, oh, you know, another family that we thought they were bad guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Horrible way to put it, but that is genuinely, I think, a little bit of the attitude.
And also just a reflection of that reflex, I guess, of fearing another bombing like that again and just taking things to the absolute other extreme, where the information clearly was not vetted correctly. You know, there's a family that paid a big price for that.
There was that need to show that there was going to be a reaction, a vengeance for what happened at Abbey Gate. Consequences be damned if we get it wrong. I'm sure the people that were involved in that didn't see it that way. I'm sure they would if they were sitting across the table from me right now, I'm sure they would characterize their decision-making process differently. But at the end of the day, the results are the same. There had to have been carelessness because they did get it wrong.
Absolutely. And there's a certain level of, I guess, a lack of responsibility, that there was sort of no acknowledgement. And it was then upsetting to see members of the administration at that time go on to try to tell the American people that they thought that it was a successful evacuation. And I think it doesn't matter your politics at all. You can't look at that and think that that is in any way a sort of a successful way to have done an evacuation.
No, and especially for as long as we'd been in the country, for as much as, you know, and it's easy to sit here and Monday morning quarterback it,
Sure.
but if people recall, this isn't Monday morning quarterbacking, because the things that people have said should have happened are things that people were saying should happen before the evacuation, and they just didn't get listened to.
Yeah.
Things like using Bagram to do the evacuation rather than Kabul, or doing a dual evacuation of Bagram and Kabul, so that not so much pressure. When you made Kabul the entire epicenter of how to get out of Afghanistan, people from all over the country were hopping on the highway, braving Taliban checkpoints, all sorts of different things, trying to hide that they ever worked with Americans. I mean, real distress for any Afghans trying to get out, but also any of the Americans that were like you for a minute there. You were trying to figure out how to get out of there before you realized, oh, I can hold out here. When it's like everybody has to get to Kabul, you make that the single pressure point.
Yeah.
You know, like how else is it going to go? And it was like the entire time people tried to, it was like they were trying to hide that we were withdrawing.
Yeah, it was bizarre. And also like, sort of instead of, taking maybe time with it, or there was this sort of symbolic deadline, I think, of September 11, 20 years.
Yep.
And we were beholden to these. Yeah, that didn't need to be the situation at that time. I mean, even if the Taliban had, already taken over the country, which they already had by the time the Americans had left, I don't think there would have been a huge amount of pushback to, extending that a little bit to make sure the evacuation happened safely. But because we had that self-imposed deadline, I mean, there was no real vetting either of who was coming in. I mean, I know of people that were banned from the US that got to the US, and certainly they weren't service members or people that had, had visas approved, SIV visas. But yet, if you could get in that gate, you could get on a flight.
It was a physical barrier, not an administrative one.
And that's why you also look at so many of those evacuation flights, and they're young men. They're military-age men, because they're the ones with the strength to muscle through that crowd, whereas the wives and the sisters and the daughters and the mothers, they don't, and they're the ones that are left behind.
Trying to throw their babies up over the barbed wire.
And so, that to me also spoke volumes, because we didn't know who was getting out, but part of me felt really sad about the fact that, I think about it a little differently, I think, to a lot of my friends, in that nobody can do your fighting for you. The Americans can't win Afghanistan for you. And that was the saddest part, is seeing all these young, able-bodied Afghans leave, because if you aren't going to be the ones fighting for your country, then who is? And so then it was very apparent to me that that it was a lost cause.